From the point of its founding, democratic government in the United States of America has faced the challenging need to overcome certain obstacles inherent in both its organization and general structure before many of its basic assumptions could be actualized. Learned and astute observers of the founding and development of American democracy noted the threatening nature of a number of these obstacles during the early days of the new republic. The study proposed here finds its importance and justification in the concept that several of the original problems of American democracy have endured with increasingly ominous consequences for the full realization of democratic government in the United States. In particular, two of the most crucial problems which have hindered the development of truly democratic government in America are treated here. Class and racial cleavages, which have historically been the source of division and bitter antagonism between sectors of American society. And two, the inherent and long-standing distrust held by the American ruling class of any institutionalized democracy involving the mass population. The continuing existence of these two problems, compounded, of course, by companion evils, has from one time to another enlarged and set in motion a debilitating dialectic which has kept full democracy at bay, and the very fabric of American society in rather constant peril. What is hoped for here is an examination of specific responses and events related to the aforementioned problem that is capable of shedding an enlightening beacon of light on the nature and progression of maladies related to these problems and what is thereby portended for American society in terms of present results and future possibilities. There is, in other words, the attempt to forge an analysis capable of informing and instructing those who are devoted to and must continue to grapple with these outstanding problems, problems in need of being resolved if ever democratic government in America is to achieve any degree of substance consistent with its theoretical suppositions and ideals. The first problem in American democracy set forth here was offered the summary justification by the Founding Fathers that it was a limited representative or republican form of democracy that was best suited and most desirable for the new country's governance. This intent, limited though it is, was mocked by the peculiar contradiction that the populace to be served by the new government included sizable sectors which were not to be regarded as beneficiaries of even the most limited promise of democracy. African Americans, Native Americans, and women were never presumed to be within the pale of either hopes or guarantees related to the practice of democracy. This marked exclusion in the idealism of America's founders might well be regarded as the original wellspring of dissent in America, for what is all too apparent is the fact that democracy is a dynamic and infectious idea. It is an idea which inspires the hope of universal inclusion. Thus, it may subsequently have been predicted that the arbitrary, capricious, and sinister exclusion of large sectors of the American population from the hopes inspired by the rhetoric of a fledgling democracy would give rise to the most determined forms of human struggle imaginable, including those which resort to force of arms and resolve to face death before capitulation. The deliberately designed and nurtured class and racial cleavages of American society, present from its beginning, have fostered such extreme antagonisms during every period in the development of American society. This study draws upon a course of events taking place during the latter half of the 20th century, which exemplifies the ultimate form of struggle born of this contrived contradiction, a contradiction which is old as the life of the American Republic as itself. The contradiction which provides much of the source material for this study would doubtless have never have existed nor reached such dastardly and volatile proportions if it were not for the societal-wide ingestion of a class and racially based social philosophy which stemmed from the original premise of American social organization, a deeply ingrained belief that society is by nature divided into the superior and inferior of people. This vision of the natural order of society, rationalized by those who have a vested interest in its maintenance, has kept Americans of different classes and races either directly engaged in social warfare or forever poised in a position of battle. Forever poised in a position of battle. There has been, in other words, from the very beginning of the American Republic as we know it, a systematically cultivated polarization which has predisposed the population to varying but continuous levels of warfare. This sinister and carefully maintained die of social antagonism has been recast with the changing mold of each different epoch of American society. Always, the rulers of an order, consistent with their own interests and solely of their own design, have employed what to them seemed to be the most optimal and efficient means of maintaining unquestioned social and economic advantage. Clear-cut superiority in things social and economic by whatever means has been a scruples-free premise of American ruling class authority from the society's inception to the present. The initial socioeconomic advantage being begotten by chattel slavery was enforced by undaunted violence and the constant threat of more violence. In other times, there has been political repression, peonage, debt slavery, wage slavery, chicanery, and so on, but always accompanied by the actual or threatened force of violence. The import of the combined forces of industrialization and urbanization has been a principal contributor in the 20th century to the need of the American ruling class to develop newer, less obvious, and more effective means of retaining control of and domination over the masses of Americans. Direct and unconcealed brute force and violence, although clearly persisting in many quarters of society, are today less acceptable to an increasingly sophisticated public, a public significantly remote from the methods of social and economic control common to early America. This is not a statement, however, that there is such increased civility that Americans can no longer tolerate social control of the country's underclass by force of violence. Rather, it is an observation that Americans today appear to be more inclined to induce endorsement to agents and agencies of control, which carry out the task, while permitting the benefactors of such control to retain a semi-dignified, clean hands image of themselves. This attitude is very largely responsible for the rise of the phenomenon to which systematic attention is given in the study undertaken here. The rise in the 1960s of control tactics heavily reliant upon deliberate misinformation, selective harassment, infiltration, and the use of the legal system to quell broad-based dissent and its leadership. Such tactics are, of course, closely identified with the presidency and administration of Richard M. Nixon, although many of these tactics were used prior to the Nixon years. However, it was under the leadership of Nixon that Americans in their majority, when they were confronted by the widespread protest over both domestic and foreign policies, issued to the government and its agencies what appeared to be the blanket approval of the squelching of dissent by means legal or illegal. This led inexorably to a vast and pernicious campaign of no-holds-barred conspiracies and extra-legal acts designed by law enforcement agencies to neutralize, contain, and or destroy organizations and individuals thought to be enemies of the American government or the status quo merely because they had dared to disagree openly with the existing order and its policies. Such campaigns were tragically successful in too many cases for too many years before Americans began to realize the true extent of the victimization. It is a fundamental assertion of this study that the majority society, in its fear-provoked zeal to maintain and assure its inequitable position in American society, flirted with and came dangerously close to total abandonment of the particular freedom upon which all others are ultimately dependent, the right to disagree. Moreover, it is an ancillary claim of this study that the danger has not yet passed, for few, if any, of society's major problems have been solved, and a large number of Americans seem yet inclined to believe that special treatment and different rules can be applied to Americans who dare to disagree without consequence for those who are in agreement with the powers and policies that be. This belief is to be specifically denied, and the claim to be made is that repression of selected sectors of mass society is extremely difficult to carry out, if not impossible, without resulting in a loss of cherished freedoms for the entire society. This premise constitutes a seminal focal point and objective of the analysis to be undertaken here.